Last week on the 18th of November 2022, Uganda lost a political icon, Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere. The former President General of the Democratic Party, who passed on at 90 years at his home in Rubaga, has left a legacy. The former two-time presidential candidate in 1980 and in 1996 is remembered for his strong belief in non-violent means to power. As a strong believer in political pluralism, he served in President Museveni's broad-based government that came to power through the gun in 1986. He held several ministerial positions from 1986 to 1995 until he fell out with Museveni due to ideological differences. Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere was the last kind of opposition political leaders who believe in a united opposition and are civil in opposing ruling governments.
Extremely important that we revisit the constitutional and legal framework to ensure that democracy under multi-party dispensation is to be embraced wholeheartedly by all institutions in the government. When we've done that, ensure that the body or the authority which oversees, which controls the funding is totally independent and its integrity is beyond the question. We have to learn from other countries which have done this very well.
He was the first politician to advocate for regulating the use of money in electoral politics at a time when nobody cared about money in politics.
For the opposition parties to freely access money, even from their own members, let alone from those who are better off, say in business, but depend very much on working harmoniously with the government at the time. So
money has been used in favor of the ruling party. Money has been used in favor of the ruling party. Money has been used in favor of the ruling party. Money has been used in favor of the ruling party. Money has been used in favor of the ruling party. Money has been used in favor.
The fallen political giant who led DP for 25 years also believed in the concept of proportional representation as opposed to the winner takes it all. He advocated for proportional representation that recognizes and rewards political parties' representation in parliament according to the number of votes a political party has garnered in an election. Until he breathed his last, he always tried to unite the opposition political parties in Uganda. Today, when Acfim Talks, we dedicate this episode to celebrate Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere, a politician of a rare kind and the last of his generation.
Indeed, today we dedicate this episode to celebrate the oracle of Uganda's multi-party politics, Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere, who passed on. It's exactly a week. It was it's a Friday, I think, when news began streaming in, and we continue to celebrate the icon. Yesterday, Parliament also paid tribute to the late Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere, and we'll be having a discussion into that. And before we start, allow me to welcome everybody. Welcome to yet another episode of Acfim Talks. Today, the 25th of Friday, November 2022. We are live on Facebook and Twitter, AcfimUG. You can also get us on Twitter at AcfimUG and YouTube, AcfimUG. You can be part of this conversation and follow us live. You'll be able to get the notifications. Just subscribe and you won't be able to miss any of these. We are always live every Friday between 11 and midday. Once again, you are most welcome. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are catching us from. Welcome to Acfim Talks. Your host, Felix Kafuma, and I am joined by two distinguished gentlemen. They are regulars on Acfim Talks. It's good to have them on stage. I have with me Henry Kasacha, who is the current executive director of Dialogue and Democracy Training Center. He's been very, very instrumental in supporting democracy and governance work close for 20 years. He is also remembered to be a founder, program manager of Inter-Party Organization for Dialogue, IPOD, at a time when creating a platform to support political parties that are represented in parliament. That idea was birthed with the support of Netherlands Institute for Multiparty Democracy. It's good to have you, Henry, on Acfim Talks.
Thank you very much, Felix. And it's always nice to join the talks. And I'm happy to be here as we celebrate the life of our friend, our leader, the great Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere.
Thank you so much. I'll also be joined at some point with Henry Moguzi, who is also a regular. He's an electoral democracy expert and corruption activist, and also the executive director of Alliance for Finance Monitoring. When he joins us, I'll be able to recognize him. But as we wait for Henry, again, today we dedicate this episode to just celebrate Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere, his contribution to the country, to democracy. He has left a legacy which is worth and talking about. And there is much more people don't know about Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere in terms of the things he did right from when he joined politics from around 1958, working as an understudy to then Ben Chwanga was the DP president. And since then, but even before joining, he served at I think the vice guild president of Makerere University. So right from a young age, he had distinguished himself as a leader who loved to serve. And we are going to just have a reflection on his contribution, his personality, and what can we learn as Ugandans, as politicians, from such a maestro. And let me start with you, Henry. Just can you describe the late Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere in terms of his political career and life, from your perspective?
Well, from my perspective, I think that a description of Dr. Kawanga is not very easy, but it basically revolves around the nature of person he was, the politics he practiced, the methods he opted to use, and the values Dr. Ssemwogerere believed in. Dr. Ssemwogerere, in terms of description, was a person who believed in non-violence. He believed in truth and justice. And these were not just slogans, but these were values that were so much into Dr. Ssemwogerere, both in his personal life, in private discussions, and in his politics. This was Dr. Ssemwogerere. He was a very strong person in terms of justice. Dr. Ssemwogerere valued human life like nothing. And to Dr. Ssemwogerere, nothing could be, he could not lose a life for anything in this world. He could not lose a life for politics. He could not allow lives being lost for leadership, for positions, and for being in government. Dr. Ssemwogerere was also a very peace-loving person. He believed in working together, regardless of the differences. Dr. Ssemwogerere always believed that we had common elements, we had commonalities that could unite us despite of our political diversity. So I think that in terms of description, the late Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere was very grounded in terms of values. He was not a transactional leader. He believed in what he practiced, and he was a very humble person. I mean, both after leaving government and also leaving the leadership of the party, he stayed in his home and he was very humble in nature. All his discussions revolved around being humble as a politician. I also think that Dr. Ssemwogerere had a very firm foundation in terms of being nurtured, with the values being centered into whatever he was doing as a politician. So briefly, that's what I can describe the late Dr. Ssemwogerere. I think he was one in his class or his league, and we have so many to learn from the late Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere.
Wow, there you have it. Yesterday I was following the news, and as Parliament was eulogizing, celebrating Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere's life, many of them did allude to the fact that he was a nationalist. He loved country first, a very rare character among today's politicians, loving country first, and the vanguard of democracy and rule of law. And that explains his contribution as Uganda was gaining independence. Was very instrumental. I think and DP as a party, I think, is the first party to hand over power peacefully, a short-lived power between 1961 and then they handed it over to UPC-KY Alliance. I think it's the only peaceful transfer of power we've experienced as a country, again under DP. So DP presents a very, as a party, it has, it is really inked in democracy and the non-violent means. It is also, as many did refer to him as a man of integrity, who believed so much and pushed for multi-party democracy. And I'll come back to that, the issue of multi-party democracy, because when you read history, I think from around 2000, between 2000 and 2002, he did challenge the one-party state, the NRM, at that point in time. In fact, his name is inked in the Political Parties Organizational Act processes that led to that act in 2002. Is quite a remarkable man. Henry, you are most welcome. We've been here just reflecting on the man, Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere, the late, and you've joined us at the right time. You're most welcome, Henry Amoguzi. I think you can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear. My namesake, Kasacha, quite an honor to be with you on the platform once again.
Thank you very much.
Great, great, Henry. In fact, let me also give you a chance to, in your own words, how can you describe the life and career of the late Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere?
Well, of course, Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere is a man you cannot describe in just a few words. But I want to highlight one of the things that I really gave him credit for. You will understand that Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere takes over the reins of the Democratic Party at a time when the party was quite unpopular in the country. You'd recall what happened with Ben Chiwanuka, where the Kingdom Buganda fell out with Ben, and then they had to enter alliance with the UPC, that KY UPC alliance. So Ssemwogerere, as a young, Democrat, takes over this party and had to fight that, and we give him credit for having made sure that he did restore the popularity of the party in Uganda, because by the time we went into elections in 1980, you would see that the kingdom, the region, the Uganda region, was 100% behind the party. So it's not a small thing. It's not easy to return the perceptions, but also the support of the entire kingdom that had fallen apart. So we credit his organizing capabilities for having done this. We also remember him as a peacemaker. I think you mentioned about this earlier, because throughout he believed in peace. This man is the one that always put country first. what we've seen lately is quite a number. Is that there are a number of politicians that put self before country. When you put self before country, it means you do everything possible to make sure that you protect your personal interests. This man, even when in 1980 the elections were stolen, for the good of the country, he said, let it go. I remember when he was advising the current principal of NOP so vividly that it is not worth it to have people take blood just in the interest of you standing. So you get to see that he was always a peacemaker. But of course, the other thing you want to take away were his views about financing of politics and political parties. You recall we hosted him at one time in the symposium of 2020. And then one of the things we remember is that what he called the 6 feature model. And he had, of course, very strong views about financing political parties. I had an opportunity as a person to interact with the departed Democrat. And we spoke at length about the political finance systems of Uganda and where he sees this going and what he thinks would have been the solution to fix the runaway commercialization and monetization of elective politics. And so in a few words, this is how I can remember him. But of course, we are going to miss him. But of course, also to know that he planted the seeds of what he called brain power, in DP. You earlier on alluded to that, the case that they won against the one-party dictatorship, as they called it. And of course, the constitution would rule in their favor, and that would precursor the return to multi-party political dispensation. Back to you, Felix.
Thank you so much. And for those of you who don't know, let me add this, that he also had a stint of teaching. He taught in Namiriango College and also at St. Leo's. And that's where he was approached. That's where I was approached and by Ben Chwanuka to join politics around 1959. So, and he was also a boxer in his early days. So, very, very interesting character of the late. But there's something I want to point out here as well, that he has also tested, in as much as he did push for peace within a context that was volatile and authoritarian at that place. He also tested prison life. I think he was incarcerated together with Ben Chwanuka between 66 and around 71. So, and he also, as a presidential candidate, he was no stranger to some form of mistreatment, especially there were incidents, they have not been popularized, been kept under wraps, how he struggled to campaign in 1996 and how he had to come up against all sorts of state interferences, including what was perceived to be some kind of like a sabotage when he was going to conduct his last rally somewhere in Kawanga. But I'll come back to that later. Henry Kasacha, let me looking at Dr. Paul Kawanga's approach to politics.
Yeah.
Do you think that kind of approach to politics, which Dr. Paul Kawanga practiced and believed in, still does it have a place in the authoritarian context right now, where Uganda is at the moment?
Well, thank you very much. I think that going back to Dr. Kawanga Ssemwogerere and his approach was driven by the values he stood for, and the values of respecting human rights, respecting the rule of law, respecting human life, respecting and promoting justice are values that will remain values even in a dictatorship. And if you believe in those values, you will continuously believe in the approach Dr. Ssemwogerere took. I personally had the opportunity of always meeting Dr. Ssemwogerere in his sitting room and would talk at length He would share some of his experiences, and you could see the conviction in his approach. Actually, unfortunately, we were supposed to meet with Dr. Ssemwogerere on the 22nd of this month. That's when he told me, Kasacha, please call me on the 22nd and we have another round of discussions. But the most important thing about his approach is that his approach is driven by values. His approach was not the end justifies the means. His approach was that the means were as equally as important as the destination. Dr. Ssemwogerere could lose an election, he could see his victory being taken away, and he would not even throw a stone, which is very challenging to so many people. The fact that he chose legal litigation to promote multi-party democracy also speaks to his commitment to those values. So I think that one of the challenges we face as a country and the challenges we face as Africa or as many developing countries that are struggling with improving systems is that we have a leadership that may not be so grounded in values of development and values of sustainable development and values of human rights. But that does not mean that these values can be disregarded. Even this, it is very difficult to have or to implement them. I think that some of these values, and the other issue is that Dr. Ssemwogerere rose to the leadership through a very long and carefully planned process. He did not emerge from anywhere to become President General. He did not emerge from anywhere to become what he became. He went through a nurturing process. And this is also one of the things that Dr. Ssemwogerere believed in. That you cannot promote these values if you do not nurture people. We remember him for his work in the Uganda Young Democrats. UID emerged at a time when we are in the movement system, when the political space was closed. It emerged as a very energetic, vibrant, and sometimes aggressive youth organization. But through the likes of Dr. Ssemwogerere, continuously talking to these young Democrats about some of these values, some of them actually have picked them. So I would say that that the values Dr. Ssemwogerere believed in, the approach, I want to share an example. In 2010, we traveled to Ghana with the political parties to look for dialogue and to learn from their experience. In Ghana, they told us, and they told me as the facilitator of the process, that unless you can identify people in your country who are respected across the board, who believe in the talking, you may not be able to pursue political dialogue in this country. Dr. Ssemwogerere had retired from politics. He was in Rwanda. I approached Dr. Ssemwogerere and told him exactly this. I believe that Dr. Ssemwogerere would still be listened to across the board. He believed in this approach, despite having all the reservations about political dialogue. Dr. Ssemwogerere was always ready to give dialogue a chance. He had actually agreed to be part of a selected panel of elders who would reach out to various political players to search for consensus. One of the challenges we have is that the search for consensus has been abandoned. And it's just a few like Dr. Ssemwogerere who believe that it is possible to look for consensus. It's not enough to say we do not have consensus. It's not enough to say that people do not believe in dialogue. But Dr. Ssemwogerere realized that some people do not believe in dialogue, and he deliberately made his efforts to convince them to believe in dialogue. This he did at a national level, but even within the Democratic Party, that has also been extremely unstable ever since he left leadership of the party. He has always told that line. So I would say that yes, the values that Dr. Ssemwogerere believed in are not values that can grow overnight, are not values that can emerge because people believe these values are good. These are values that must be nurtured. Unfortunately, we do not have so many people who have been nurtured in these values. And what this means is that we must make deliberate efforts, like Dr. Ssemwogerere did, to nurture people into these values. Otherwise, the country may not see any progress. It may go into reverse mode if we do not practice the nature of politics that we want to pursue. The fact that he also believed in proportional representation shows you that how Dr. Ssemwogerere believed in accommodating. And the other element that comes through Dr. Ssemwogerere is he joined government in 1986 and he left in 1996. He did not join the NRM, he joined government. And some of us who had the opportunity of having private discussions with him, he also discussed and shared with us his experience in that kind of government, where he was an opposition leader and he was part of government. So I think that what Dr. Ssemwogerere practiced and what he believed in is still relevant for the sustainability of our democratization process as a country.
Thank you so much. Indeed, he served as the Minister of Internal Affairs, then served as the second Deputy Prime Minister, then served as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and at some point he served as the Minister of Public Service. So, like you said, he served in government but didn't join them. Henry, you've had Kasasha's response in terms of whether we still have a place in the context Uganda is right now, the authoritarian context. For the kind of politics Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere practiced. As you comment on that also, there is a question that speaks to Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere's eye for, because he's the first person who talked about campaign financing, the concept of money in politics. What did he see at that time, when most people were not necessarily seeing it, but he was able to see it, that a couple of years later on, also Alliance for Finance Monitoring, which you had and where you were founder, you were able to grasp and say, this is the real problem Uganda is facing.
Thank you very much, Felix. Of course, the major challenge you are facing as Uganda is the lack of democracy. And therefore, for anybody to survive in the current context, there should be what you can call political tolerance. For the kind of political leaders we have now in place, where the regime, kind of the mantra seems to be we either win or they lose. You cannot practice democracy, and therefore you need people of the mentality and political mindset of the departed Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssemwogerere in order for you to navigate this situation. And of course, for us as a country, we have tested almost everything. We have tested violence. We've been changing regimes. We've never seen we have never witnessed a peaceful transfer of power. But what has resulted from that? I think the learning must be that using military force or insurgency to change political leadership has not worked. And therefore, we need to hang in there and believe that the very values that the departed doctor believed in can still apply. Okay, I liked when my namesake spoke about Dr. Ssemwogerere's belief in representative in proportional representation. I remember him telling me when we were having a discussion that he believed so strongly that if this was the kind of system we were practicing in 1980, there would have been no cause for Mr. Museveni to go to the bush, because he had won a seat, and therefore his party would have shared the spoils of power if proportional representation was the system being practiced. Because the current system of winner takes all, or one they refer to as first past the post, does not seem to be working, because it disenfranchises and disgruntled many political leadership. But away from that, we remember so vividly that he published a book he calls Political Party Financing in Uganda, a reality check. And of course, he looked and saw, and of course, he was alive to the reality that money is the mother's milk of politics. Without money, you cannot have politics. And therefore, he knew that this subject had to be addressed. And at the time, it was quite peripheral on the minds of many political analysts. So he chooses to write a book. And I remember speaking specifically with what was his mindset when he was writing his book, and I think he tells me that one of the things that spurred him into action were he had read the amendment to the Political Parties and Organizations Act that allowed public financing of political parties. But before that amendment, there had been a provision where if you were nominated to contest for presidential elections, as it were in 1996 when he contested, the Electoral Commission will provide you with a war chest of just 20 million. And he told me at the time he received 20 million shillings, he needed a minimum of 50 billion to campaign. And therefore, 20 million would be a drop in the ocean. And therefore, that was not adequate. But even when the Political Party and Organizations Act was amended in 2010 to allow public financing of political parties, he said there was an inherent structural imbalance. Because to propose, there are two issues he had issues with. The first one is the formula of numerical strength when it came to day-to-day running of the political parties, and he was telling me that it's not clear what they meant day-to-day activities, because those activities are not kind of prescribed, and therefore that remained vague. But also the other one is that what would happen if the party in power is not the one that has a commanding majority in parliament? Because that could happen. For now, the party in power, the regime has a commanding majority, but it could be the other way around. And so he said that could provide a structural imbalance. But also when it came to financing, the provision on financing elections, which according to the amendment, the money then would be shared equally. His issues were that it's not clear what the law referred to as elections. It wasn't clear whether what the law refers to as elections includes the political presidential elections, parliamentary elections, or local council elections. And therefore, they don't have to define those. But even then, you would see that the challenge he had was the lack of regulations then to define what that would be. But we commend and remember him having taken the effort to put this in writing, because the only way you can put your views, you can present your views for the next generation to benefit from or refer to, is to put them in writing. And the fact that he emerges as the first politician to put pen and paper, to put his views in writing on political financing, I think is something we will forever commend, and it's something for us as activists that are working on promoting transparency and accountability in political financing will forever be grateful for and refer to. Thank you, Felix.
Thank you so much. And we are going for a short break, but when we return, we will continue with the discussion, looking at the man who believed so much in a united opposition, and we shall pick it up from there. What does that now mean moving forward, now that he has left the scene?